The NATO bombing of Yugoslavia was the NATO military operation against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia during the Kosovo War. The airstrikes lasted from March 24 to June 10, 1999. The bombing continued until an agreement was reached that led to the withdrawal of Yugoslav armed forces from Kosovo and the establishment of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Kosovo. The official NATO operation codename was Operation Allied Force, whereas the United States called it Operation Noble Anvil. Hello and welcome to another video in Historyland. Before we get into the video, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you, let's jump into the video. After September 1990, when the 1974 Yugoslav Constitution had been unilaterally repealed by the Socialist Republic of Serbia, Kosovo's autonomy suffered and so the region was faced with state-organized oppression. Later, Kosovar Albanians started an insurgency against Belgrade when the Kosovo Liberation Army was founded in 1996. Armed clashes between the two sides broke out in early 1998. A NATO-facilitated ceasefire was signed on October 15, named Rambouillet Accords, but both sides broke it 2 months later and fighting resumed. When the killing of 45 Kosovar Albanians in Račak massacre was reported in January 1999, NATO decided that the conflict could only be settled by introducing a military peacekeeping force to forcibly restrain the two sides. Operation Allied Force predominantly used a large-scale air campaign to destroy Yugoslav military infrastructure from high altitudes. After the third day of aerial bombing, NATO had destroyed almost all of its strategic military targets in Yugoslavia. Despite this, the Yugoslav army continued to function and to attack Kosovo Liberation Army insurgents inside Kosovo, mostly in the regions of northern and southwest Kosovo. NATO bombed strategic economic and societal targets, such as bridges, military facilities, and factories. The NATO Air Force also targeted infrastructure such as power plants, water processing plants, and a state-owned broadcaster, causing much environment and economic damage throughout Yugoslavia. The campaign involved 1,000 aircraft operating from air bases in Italy and Germany, and the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt, sailing in the Adriatic Sea. During the 10 weeks of the conflict, NATO aircraft flew over 38,000 combat missions. On March 24th at 7 p.m., NATO started the bombing campaign against Yugoslavia. FA-18 Hornets of the Spanish Air Force were the first NATO planes to bomb Belgrade. In addition to fixed-wing air power, 1 battalion of Apache helicopters from the United States Army was deployed to help combat missions. The campaign was initially designed to destroy Yugoslav air defenses and high-value military targets. NATO military operations increasingly attacked Yugoslav units on the ground, as well as continuing the strategic bombardment. An important portion of the war involved combat between Yugoslav Air Force and the opposing air forces from NATO. United States Air Force F-15s and F-16s flying from Italian Air Force bases attacked defending Yugoslav fighters, mainly MiG-29s, which were in poor condition due to a lack of spare parts and maintenance. Yugoslav Air Force used MiG-29s to encounter NATO fighters. Also, Yugoslav Air Force used strike aircraft J-22 Oreos and J-4 Super Gallops for combat missions against Kosovo Liberation Army in Kosovo. On March 27, 1999, the 3rd Battalion of the 250th Missile Brigade, under the command of Colonel Zoltan Dani, downed an American F-117 Nighthawk. The pilot ejected and was rescued by search and rescue forces near Belgrade. This was the first and so far only time a stealth aircraft has been shot down by hostile ground fire in combat. On April 30th, some United States sources claimed that a second F-117 was damaged by a surface-to-air missile. Although the aircraft returned to base, it supposedly never flew again. NATO reported that it lost 21 UAVs, 1 F-16 and 1 F-117 Nighthawk, and some other fighters damaged due to a technical failure or enemy actions during the conflict. Also, Yugoslav Air Force lost 6 MiG-29s and some others damaged due to malfunctioning systems. Suppression of enemy air defenses for NATO were principally carried out by the US Air Force. Where possible, NATO attempted to proactively destroy air defense sites using F-16s and F-15E Strike Eagles. Further difficulties came in the form of airspace restrictions, which forced NATO aircraft into predictable flight paths, and rules of engagement, which prevented NATO from targeting certain sites for fear of collateral damage. As many as 528 Yugoslav civilians were killed in the 90 separate incidents in Operation Allied Force. Refugees were among the victims. Military casualties on the NATO side were limited. According to the official reports, the alliance suffered no fatalities from combat operations. Only 2 NATO manned aircraft were shot down. A further F-117 Nighthawk and 2 A-10 Thunderbolts were damaged by hostile fire. Also, 1 Harrier crashed in the Adriatic Sea due to technical failure. NATO also lost 25 UAVs due to enemy action or mechanical failures. In early June, a Finnish-Russian mediation team headed by Martti Ahtisaari and Viktor Chernomyrdin traveled to Belgrade to meet with Milosevic for talks on an agreement that would suspend air strikes. When NATO agreed Kosovo would be politically supervised by the United Nations and that there would be no independence referendum for 3 years, the Yugoslav government agreed to withdraw its forces from Kosovo under strong diplomatic pressure from Russia, and the bombing was suspended on June 10th. The Yugoslav army and NATO signed the Kumanovo Agreement. The war ended on June 11, and Russian paratroopers seized Slatina airport to become the first peacekeeping force in the war zone. 10 years after the operation, the Republic of Kosovo declared independence with the new Republic of Kosovo government. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.